I appreciate everybody dropping by. So today I wanted to talk about working planes, which is a very useful device for 3D modeling, particularly if everything isn't perfectly orthogonal. And um, something that I think a lot of users find a little off-putting, and so maybe don't explore as much as they could. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to cover those bases. So let's see. I've got this file over here. Can everybody see my screen okay? Just go ahead and unmute yourself if you.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Don. I appreciate that. Always have to check. It would be terrible if I were talking for half an hour and all you see is nothing. Anyway, so I've got this little, I'm just going to delete this. I've got this little shape here. Let me go to a top plan view and then a front view. I can also use the little widget here. So very simple shape, right? It's basically just an extrusion here. I'll just go ahead and make a new one. Why not? So I'll start with a rotated rectangle. Oh, there's something else I want to do. Sorry. Turn on my visualize. Yeah, there we go. All right. So we'll start with a rotated rectangle, for example, and I'm deliberately making something that's some uh, um, non-orthogonal angle. And let's make this also a little bigger. Um, uh, Always a fan of the golden section. So we'll do that. And then we'll go ahead and we can extrude that. Uh, all right. So there it is. It's nicely extruded. And I like this color, so I'll just put that down. Great. Let's go ahead and render that. And I'll go ahead and use the tapered face tool to taper. Oh, went a little too far there. Taper that face, say, to this midpoint. And then while I'm at it, I'll use the taper face tool again to taper this face, say, to this quarter point. Great. So in top view, we've got something like this. In 2D, it looks like that. So there it is. Oh, and just to make it fun, we'll taper one more time. So pick that back face and then midpoint. Something like that. Great. Now it's really tapered. So sometimes I may want to, when I've got a solid prism like this or a building or whatever it is, it could be a mechanical part, doesn't really matter what the scale is. I may want to draw on one of these faces or even model off of one of these faces. So, if I go to a top plan view, I can go to a right view, and you can see that by taking this orthogonal right view or a side view or another side view, like I've sort of deliberately made this thing so that it doesn't really lend itself to any particular orthogonal views. And so with a layer without working planes, if I wanted to say draw on one of these faces, I might have to do something like the set 3D view tool to pick that edge and pick an orthogonal view along that edge so that I'm seeing that, edge that way, or go back to a top plan view. Maybe once again, I might pick this edge and do an orthogonal view so that I have this nice completely non-oblique view of that one face. Maybe I would save the view, create a save view for myself so that I could easily go back and forth to these different views and model that way. But then if the geometry changes or the slope changes, I got to do my save views all over again. There's a lot of reasons why this can be a little bit cumbersome, even though I think for many of us, myself included, it comes naturally to be sort of thinking about drawing orthogonal to the screen, right? Particularly if you're a longtime Vectorworks user, the notion of screen plane geometry versus layer plane geometry is kind of baked into your mindset. Um, so here instead, what I can do is I can define what are called working planes. So there's always a default working plane in each of your layers, and that's the layer plane, right? So if I just grab this rectangle, for example, and I just go to layer plane view right up here, or layer plane mode rather, and I just start drawing a rectangle, right? It is on the layer plane. There it is, layer plane. And that's great. So that is sort of a default working plane for your 2D and 3D geometry. But Vectorworks can allow you to stipulate any plane to be a working plane. And so over here in your 3D uh, your 3D modeling tool set, pull that out so you can see it a little more clearly. Over here, it is down here is set working plane. I have these alphabetized, but you could be in any order. So there's two tools here, which we're going to talk about both of them. There's a set working plane, and then there's a line plane, but we'll get to that later. So for the set working plane, I'll go ahead and pick that tool. And you can see that I have two modes, right? I have this 3-point mode over here, the first mode, and then I have this planar face mode. I find the planar face mode just a little bit more laid back. It's fewer clicks, less thinking, but the flip side is you have a little bit less control. So I often just use the planar face mode and then just kind of deal with the consequences. So you'll see once I activate this tool, my cursor now has this sort of light pink square on it. It's in perspective or in isometric. And then it's got this green axis and this red axis. These are X and Y, of course. The direction that it's tapering towards, that's positive and negative, right? So as you can see, once I start hovering over this geometry, it lights up the face blue. And so it is telling me that it is identifying, it's noticing that plane, and it's ready to go ahead and create a working plane attached to that plane. So that's sort of the first thing to know about setting up a working plane, is that in order to create a working plane, you need some geometry beforehand for the working plane to be to snap to, right? It could just be three loci in space, right? You'll remember from your Euclid that 3 points define a plane. So it could just be three 3D loci in space, or it could be the face of some geometry like what I just created. And then you'll also notice, because I have my object snap settings turned on over here, that it's giving me a little screen hint. Okay, I'm done with that. It's giving me a little screen hint in the form of this plus sign close to my cursor here. And now as I snap to that, it's giving me center. So it's finding the geometric center of each of those planes, and it's allowing me to select that as the origin of that working plane. So the working plane will have an orientation, a tilt, a rotation, but it'll also have an origin, right? So I can pick that, or I could pick this endpoint here. Obviously when you're on a vertex of a solid like this, Depending on which way you wiggle your mouse, you might pick one face or the other, right? So you want to be mindful of which face is lining up. But I'll go ahead and pick that and click on the center. And there you can see that it has now created this working plane. So if you're paying attention, you'll see that my 3D navigation widget here, my on-screen control, when I clicked on the working plane, this changed orientation. So what I've now told Vectorworks is this pink rectangle on this blue plane, that is now top view, right? So if I click on top, you can see that the object rotates. Here's the side view. Here's the bottom view, right? We're back to top, other side. And same is true if I'm using the standard views, left, right, isometric, right? So if I start to use, say, my flyover tool, it's going to behave as if that was the ground. And if I go back to top, when I start drawing, even if I'm just drawing 2D geometry, right? That 2D geometry is being drawn on that face, which could be useful depending on what you're up to. So I'll go back to top here. Now I may be doing some modeling and whatnot, and I want to do some drawing and so on and so forth, and that's all great. And then at a certain point, it might be useful to be able to come back to that working plane. And so I have a command under view, and sometimes I have trouble finding it, so I'll just go to help and I'll type save. And here it is, working plane, save working plane. So let's go back to view. And maybe it's under modify. Yeah, it's under modify. So I can look at the working plane, save working plane, go toggle through my working planes and make all sorts of rotations and flips and so forth. So I'll go ahead and save this working plane. And then there's a working plane dialog box that comes up. It gives me my X, my rotations, my origin, right? And so I will just call this side face 1. I'll just give it some name. And then over here, you can see that there's this working plane menu. And I've got a couple of old working planes that I was playing with before. So I'll just go ahead and highlight those, right click on them and delete them so they're gone. Yeah. So with the working planes palette, rather, I think I said menu. With the working planes palette, I can activate the layer plane. And so now top is relative to the layer plane, or I can double click and activate side face 1. You can see how my control widget changed accordingly. And so now if I click on the top, that becomes the face. And so I can go ahead and fly around. You can see I'm not expecting that behavior, so I'm having some little trouble sort of navigating, right? So everything's sort of different because it's all relative to that working plane. But close enough, I just need to see a face. So I'll go ahead and go back to my set working plane. And this time I'm going to use the 3-point mode just to demonstrate that to you. So again, a little more control, but a few extra steps. So because I mentioned Euclid, 3 points define a plane. Right? So you click on 3 points in space, and that will define your working plane. The first place where you click is going to be the origin of that working plane. And then you can see you've got this sort of dashed line. And I could snap to anything. I can snap to this point. I mean, any 3D geometry, right? So the next one is going to be my x-axis. So I'll go ahead and snap over here. Oh, it didn't like that. I wonder why. Let's try again. I actually don't need to select it. No, it really doesn't like that. All right, well, I'm doing something wrong here. Oh, okay. I was I was clicking instead of click dragging. So I snapped and then I dragged and released, and then the third snap is going to be here. And there we go. So now you can see it's created another working plane, as you can see from that pink square there. So I'll go ahead and I don't have to go to top view here, but just to demonstrate that this is a new working plane, I can do that. Or I can go back to my previous view. And once again, under modify working planes, I can save working plane. And I'll call this sloped top. Okay. So there it is in my menu. So I can double click and make that my active working plane, or double click and make that my active working plane. You can see where I'm going here, right? I'll go ahead and do this again. Set a working plane. I'll do this one by origin. So click on center. There it is. And I'll go ahead and save that working plane. And I'll call that side face 2. Okay, so there's that working plane, that working plane, that working plane. And again, so if I want side to work on side face 2, I'll just click over here and click on top. Nope. Somehow that got lost. All right. Well, there it is. Yep. Activating the working plane doesn't actually change your view. It just makes that the top. Okay, great. So now I can start drawing some things on the working plane. You can see that now that I've selected the circle, or that matter the rectangle. Before I had two options. I had layer plane or auto plane, right? But once I activate that, then I can also draw on the working plane. So I'll go ahead and draw some rectangles here just for fun. And then let's activate my slope top and click on the top face here on my view controller, draw some rectangles here. And so you can see that all of that 2D geometry has been drawn on those faces. And I now have a really easy way to navigate from one of those working faces to the other. There's probably a limit as to how many working planes you can have. It's probably a really big limit and probably not something you need to really worry about. So now if the slope top is the active working plane, and I take that rectangle and I extrude it, it's highlighted, so I'll just extrude it, Command E, and I'll just extrude it, say 5 feet. Yep. So there it is. It's being extruded relative to that. Now, I don't know the answer to this. I'm just kind of curious. What happens if I select that rectangle and I make side face to the working plane and then I extrude it? Yeah, it's still going to be extruded perpendicular to its orientation, not the working plane's orientation, which, you know, that makes perfect sense, right? You can have a ground plane as your working plane. You can draw a rectangle inside view and extrude it, and it'll extrude in the direction that's normal to the surface of the rectangle. So none of that changes. Any questions so far about how to set up and save working planes? If you want to ask a question, you'll need to unmute yourself, or I don't see anything in the chat. Oh, okay. I guess pretty straightforward. So there's a couple of other things that you can do with working planes. So let me flip over here to an actual little model here, right? So some uses here. Right now, I've got this roof and I've got this sort of uh, pseudo standing seam texture on the roof, which, looks okay, I guess. But maybe I want to actually draw some standing seams on that roof. So I'll go ahead and change that to uh, by component and change that to none. There. Okay. So for example, I could go ahead and use my set working plane. I'll go ahead and do it by center. And I can hover to this corner and hover to that corner. And Vectorworks will find the center. There we go. And then I'll go to top view. And maybe I'll just snap a rectangle from here to here. And you can see it is the length that it is. I'll make it 1/2 inch. There. There it is. And I'll go ahead and do a duplicate array. Oh, I don't know, at best 6 of these. And you see that because of the orientation of my working plane, left is positive, right? So let's go ahead and do 4 of these. And then I'll click over here and click on that. And say something like that. Then I can use my custom selection tool, my select similar tool rather. And for my settings, I'll pick class and object type, but I'll also choose plane. So I can select all the objects that are in the same plane. So I'll click on these and sure enough, I have 9 rectangles. I'll go ahead and extrude those 2 inches and put them in my roofing class. There we go. So now I have some nice standing seams. I don't know why it's that color. Anyway, you get the idea. So that's pretty helpful. Same thing here, right? I've got this auto hybrid. Let me just go ahead and explode that. And let's go into this addition. So here's some extrusions, right? I'm guessing I probably made these. So once again, I'll just go ahead and create a set of working plane. This time I'll do it by 3 points. So click here, click there, click here. So I can be inside of a group and create a working plane. Now I can start drawing my rectangles. And go to 2D. There it is. So I'll give it a width of 1/2 inch. And once again, whoops. And grab these three, mirror. And I think what oops, sorry, didn't mean to mirror that. Probably this is like so close that what I did is back when I made this, I just moved that one over here. Move this one over here. And then select all these, distribute their spacing, extrude, right? And maybe I've got a save view here somewhere. Right. So there it is, kind of a nice, easy way to do all that. So that's a kind of a more realistic application of how you would want to do this. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is aligning things. That's the second command that's here under working planes, and that's align plane tool. So very conveniently, what I have over here is this little model of a solar array or a solar module, a solar panel, PV panel. So if I wanted to put that up on the roof, right, what I might do is go to a side view, pick it up, zoom in here, use my rotate tool, rotate it into place, right? Don't quite have the right angle. Zoom in, grab that, rotate, snap it into place, still didn't get it, etc. Right? Kind of a hassle. So let's undo that. All that's okay. So instead of doing it that way, I've got this align face tool or align plane tool. So what I need to do is first I define a safe plane. So here I've already got the roof plane defined, right? And then I'll use the align plane tool. And the working plane already has an origin and it has an X and a Y. So what I'm telling it to do is to align this geometry, which you can see from a side view, right? That's flat on the ground. It's not on the slope roof. So I'll go ahead and with the tool, I'll go ahead and click on 3 points on the object that I'm interested in aligning to the plane. I don't need to click anything on the plane, which was what I was doing before and leading me astray. So I'll go ahead and pick this point as my origin. And then that can be right here, my x-axis. And then the third place that I click is my y-axis. And you can see there it is up on the roof. Right? So if I do a move 3D so that it's, right now it's sort of sitting on top of the roof plane. It's not on those themes, right? So if I do a move 3D, I can just, instead of moving relative to the layer plane, I can move relative to the working plane and say, move it up 1.5 inches. And again, if I go to top plan view here, then it's very easy for me to rotate it 90 degrees. And again, it's rotating relative to um, the working plane. I can do a duplicate array. I can do whatever I want. Create a couple of them. Create a couple more. I make that the active layer plane. I'm back to my normal expected controls. You can see that all of that is happening relative to the roof.
Francois, is there somewhere on the screen that shows what plane you're in? You know, as the
Uh,
active plane?
yeah, the really it's going to be uh, your control widget here when you activate your plane. So, for example, the roof face, you can see that that rotated slightly. Awning face, I created a plane for that awning there. Right, so that rotated again, and then active layer plane. You can see that it's so that's that's what I find to be the easiest sort of way to sort that out and figure
Okay.
out what plane you're working on. Or you could always just hit top, right, and then it'll view you to that plane. Right, here we're perpendicular, we're normal to the awning. Now I mentioned that you could use symbols. In fact, this PV array is a symbol, right? But it has to be a 3D symbol. It can't be a hybrid symbol. So here's what happens if you try to make it a hybrid symbol. If you try to insert a hybrid symbol or align a hybrid symbol to a plane, it just won't. It'll refuse. But if you have one that's already aligned to a plane, you could right click on that and edit the 2D components, right? And draw just a regular rectangle and trace over the 3D geometry here. So create some 2D geometry to represent that. If I exit the symbol, it confirms that I want to convert a 3D symbol to a hybrid symbol. I say yes. And then you can see that immediately all of my uh, PV panels are now parallel to the ground plane, because when you have a hybrid symbol, it has to be parallel to the ground plane, right? You can't you can't rotate in 3D a hybrid symbol. So just something to be aware of. Do that. All right. Well, any other questions, or is there something that I glossed over, or perhaps you noticed that I missed?
So, Francois, if you had a mesh object,
Hmm.
do you burrow down and create one of the mesh faces basically as a working plane?
Yeah, you could do that, sure.
Okay,
Really, so long as you've got 3 points to snap, I mean, so long as you have 3 points to snap to, you can create a working plane. And you could just snap to 3 points in empty space and create a working plane from that. It's just without something to snap to, you have no idea where you're snapping.
got you.
But once you've set your new working plane, do your keyboard shortcuts, do they now apply relative to the new working plane, or are they always just orthogonal?
Like left, right,
Hmm.
top, right, lower right, those keyboard shortcuts.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
they're
Hmm.
relative, they're exactly like this controller. So right now,
Good.
if we make the awning face the active plane, right? If I go to bottom right, it's going to be bottom right relative to that. If I go to right,
Mhm.
it's well, the ground's in the way. Left, here we go. Right, so yeah, those keyboard, if you're using a numeric keypad, that's all going to be relative to your active plane.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? All right. Well, that's it for me today. Thanks again for your patience as I fumbled around there, and I will catch you next time.
Thank
Okay,
you so
thank you.
much.
Thanks, Francois.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.